Hello, and welcome back to Think Yourself Healthy podcast. I'm your host, Heather Barbieri. Before we dive into this episode, I just want to remind you that if you take a screenshot that you're listening and tag us on Instagram, we'll send you a 15% off discount for the 8-week Retrain Your Brain program. Just take a screenshot and tag me at Heather Barbieri RDN. Thanks for listening, and let's get right to it. Hello, everybody. On today's episode of Think Yourself Healthy, I have special guest and fellow registered dietitian, Christa Biegler. I'm super excited to have you on the show today. Crazy how you and I connected, and then the coincidences of our pathways that we went on, which is always fun. We'll chat a little bit about that. But Christa, thank you so much for being with us today. I'd love for you to take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience and kind of tell them a little bit about who you are and what drives you to have this conversation today.
Thank you for allowing me to come on your show. Yeah, I love the 6 degrees of separation. I think one of my things in life is looking for common denominators and how much more similar we are than we are different. Mm-hmm. So you and I interned in the same city in the middle of America, right?
Yes.
In St. Louis at different times or kind of almost overlapping times. Yeah. And then you had, friends in common, the same ones that I had, in some of our work things. And that's a little bit where our story is going to go today, is some of those work things and diet things that happened. But my background is that, how much do we really want here? Short version is I had a hella healing crisis with my skin. My skin was screaming at me when I had small kids and was changing careers and had a lot of stressors going on at about 2015. Corrected that with a lot of gut and liver work. There was a lot of pain to it because it was all over my face. Corrected that and then came in later and gave myself sluggish thyroid and adrenal situation. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But really, I've been in private practice since about 2015. I've been a dietitian for about 14 years. And I grew up in an integrative and holistic household. I thought my education was going to teach me more about that. And in fact, I did not learn much about that. So you must learn things later. I actually started doing kind of alternative type trainings with different groups of chiropractors post-college and just always felt like a fish out of water. Like, why can we not explain what's going on in the body? And I just wanted to get things. And there was kind of some I love chiropractors, but the particular training system I was in, there was a lot of ego in the room. And when I found functional dietitian work later, I was like, I found my people. And so it's been a beautiful thing, a beautiful journey. I support clients in my private practice and I have a podcast called The Less Stress Life. And I'm just a lifelong learner and curiosity psycho and love to find common connections. And like you said, what are your passions? I mean, they ebb and flow all the time, right? So I'm really interested in this subclinical thyroid stuff and how we're all kind of screwed in that capacity. I'm also really interested in nervous system work, which we definitely align with a ton. And the other stuff comes and goes a lot as well. So I'm also kind of interested in mild to moderate mold exposure and kind of sick of talking about you guys we're all going to be exposed. It's just a matter of trying to mitigate, address, correct, move on. Type thing. Yeah. Anyway, a little bit of a nutshell.
I love it. Well, in my opinion, I think that if we want to be able to withstand the test of time that's coming, we definitely have to understand nervous system function and how that pretty much regulates our entire health and well-being. And so, unfortunately, there are a lot of practices out there that diet culture have really nourished and supported that are really doing a disservice specifically to women and nervous system regulation that have negative impacts on thyroid function, gut function. And so I'm hoping that today we can kind of dive in and speak a little bit to those. I know I get asked the question all of the time, what are your thoughts about intermittent fasting? And I cringe. I'm just like, oh. So I am not a supporter of intermittent fasting. The bottom line, my personal take is we should all be fasting on a daily basis. And if we're eating within the normal rhythms that our body was designed to eat within, which is kind of sun up to sun down, we get that natural fasting occurring on a regular basis, and we don't have to do these extreme efforts at just, in my opinion, just absolute insane measures that are really wreaking havoc on people. So I'm curious, Christa, what is your personal experience, with intermittent fasting? Have you ever tried it? Is it something that you do promote with your clients? And if so, why?
So in 2017, fasting had definitely come on the scene, maybe the year before. And I started working with we'll call it a health influencer, fitness influencer company, with some of our mutual colleagues. And in that experience, or in that contract that I was working, we were kind of developing and optimizing an intermittent fasting program for primarily women in their perimenopausal years. So we were all products of, let's experiment with this, explore it, et cetera. And that was when it was new and hot and whatever. Granted, there's research to support this, right? Mm-hmm. So when we improve autophagy or program cell death, which doesn't sound good, but it is good, right? That's how our body cleans shit up. I hope I can say that. Mm-hmm. Sorry. It cleans stuff up. Then we don't have diseased tissue dividing, right? Mm-hmm. So that's all fine and dandy and wonderful, because we don't want to have diseased tissue that looks like cancer later. And so that sounds great. So we're experimenting with this, but in American style, you do it and then you do more of it. And then what are the downstream consequences? So the thing with fasting is that there may be more appropriate ways to do it, but so often it's just so it's so much like if you start to do a plant-based diet, it starts out with really good intentions. You're like, oh, I'm on this. I got all the things. I'm being really broad. And then before you know it, you're just eating fake buttered noodles, right? And so you're getting a really nutrient devoid thing. I remember this guy client saying to me one day, Christa, I fasted today, skipped lunch. I was like, dude, that was not fasting. That was skipping lunch, man. So anyway, so my experience was, I was doing fasting, and before you knew it, I slipped into those behaviors of coffee for breakfast, not nourishing first thing in the morning, right? Mm-hmm. So not getting that protein emphasis that we should actually have to break down and create amino acids to be used for all kinds of flippin' functions like brain and neurotransmitter function, which is your mood, mm-hmm. by the way, right? For tissue healing, for phase 2 detoxification, basically nothing will work, right, if you don't have the amino acids and you don't start your day that way. So you start the day malnourished. And then before you know it, you're hangry, right? And you're shoving your face. So you're not digesting that. And so what's the downstream effect of this compounded over time? It's a nightmare, mm-hmm. right? It's a nightmare. The body is geez, when am I going to get something mm-hmm. here, right? And so before you know it, the cortisol is spiked. You're putting on weight, actually, mm-hmm. right? Under the stress of it, because it's a stressor. Fasting is a stressor on the right. body. So if you're not doing it really intentionally and carefully, and by the way, a lot of the research was done in men. Mm-hmm. And so we are not men. Right. We may be equals, but we're not the same, So our bodies are not the same. So over time, what was happening was I was undernourishing and overworking and having all the stress hormones going. And so what did I do? I created a subclinical thyroid picture. Mm-hmm. What did that look like? For the typical thyroid symptoms would be cold, hair loss, and fatigue. I didn't totally resonate with fatigue because I'd experienced worse fatigue back when I had more gut and liver stuff going on. Mm-hmm. Can we always optimize these systems? Damn right, right? We can always optimize these systems, but they weren't the priorities at that moment. At that time, the thyroid was a little sluggish. What are some other thyroid things? Basically, your basal body temperature is slowing down. Fungus will overgrow. It's kind of like a bird bath mm-hmm. In the gut that's not really moving. The water's not moving. Stuff can grow. You have a predisposition to drier skin, dry hair, dry feet. What are some other ones? So feeling cold, at least extremities. And when I was under even more stress, I'd lose hair. So I had these things going on, but so many of my clients, the labs were normal. Mm-hmm. And then people just think there's such a freaking problem with the way we address thyroid in this right. country and probably this world. Right. We used to address that by symptoms, and now we address that by labs. And the labs you must feel like you are dead to get your labs to be off, it seems like. Yeah. Although I will say, to be current, the last few years, people are seeing Hashimoto's thyroid antibodies. They're seeing thyroid antibodies look crazy. And I think it's just because we've got such severe immune intruders in insult. We got such a severe immune insult over the last 3 years in a multitude of ways. I talked to someone just this morning who was giving me all of her very interesting COVID and COVID injection history and like what was happening to her. And so it was just such a picture of immune insult. And here's what it's doing to your immune system. Right. So I'm a jack of hearts, Heather. So I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you're bringing these points up. So I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's. I want to say it was probably around 2010 when I was going through, was going through divorce, just becoming single mom, overworked, like, all of the things, just all the things. And I ended up getting diagnosed with Hashimoto's. So I advocated to start I guess we would call it a microdose of thyroid medication to try and get my thyroid into a more optimized state to help offset some of the symptoms that I was experiencing. But I had to literally convince my doctor that this was the best approach for me. And it was funny because I recall going to the first doctor appointment and knowing, I had already seen my labs prior, knowing that it was within those normal reference ranges and that it was going to be a very interesting conversation to try and get them on board with what I desired. So prior to this appointment, I had started collecting all of the evidence, collecting pictures of the swollen hands, the swollen feet, the abdominal swelling, the clumps of hair falling out, the brittle nails. I just started documenting all of the evidence. So when I went to that appointment, he pulls out my lab work and he's like, everything looks great. I think you should come back in a year and we'll talk again. And I was like, well, I don't think so. And so I said to him, let's take a look at my evidence. And I laid all of the evidence out. And then he was like, well, let's see here. Oh, well, now that I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, great. So I was very fortunate because I had the knowledge and the desire to advocate for myself and get what I needed. And so I microdosed. That helped get me into an optimized state. Thyroid function was really great until I want to say it was 2020, early 2020, with all of the pandemic stressors at that time. My entrepreneur business had to take a complete change due to circumstances and not being able to travel and all of that stuff. So a lot of stress perked back up in my life and had some negative consequences with that thyroid function. Most people don't know how to advocate for themselves when it comes to getting thyroid issues addressed appropriately. They don't know what reference ranges look like. So let's talk a little bit with the audience, first and foremost, about these terrible reference ranges and how they're doing a disservice to us.
One question before I do that, because I am also a curious person and like truly so the tricky part about getting these diagnoses, and maybe this will all wrap in here, is they're going to go by the standard of care. Right. So probably you had a full thyroid panel. So we can talk about that, not just a TSH and reflex, maybe to T4, right? So that's like, let's unwrap this whole thing. But then the next thing is they're like, if they were going to give you something, it's usually going to be T4, levothyroxine, or Synthroid. That's, I believe, standard of care for first. So did you advocate for something else, or is that what you used?
So they gave me Armor. Armor is what I used. Yeah. Yep.
That's nice. I don't know why. I don't understand why that is not more typical.
Well, I advocated for it because I knew that this would be best case scenario for myself. So do you want to talk a little bit first and foremost about the differences between levothyroxine and Armor medications and why?
Sure. Let me back up one step before that, because the first question people have is, well, how should I test my hormones? Or, okay, cool. Which hormones would you like to test? Thyroid, adrenal, or sex hormones? Okay, cool. We're in thyroid version now. Great. All right. So you want to test your thyroid hormones. So you ask for your hormones to be tested, and this is what's normal. TSH And then, which is, by the way, not a thyroid hormone, and then maybe T4. One time I asked a client, so this is like my old position used to be, the doctor's got this. And then I was like, the doctor doesn't seem to be doing this. Okay, let me have my clients ask their doctor for these labs. Okay, the doctor is not doing the whole lab work. Okay, let's have clients go get their own labs drawn. Like it's such an innocent question. How can I test my hormones? But there's a lot to answer. So that's what's normal. You'd almost have to go in with, these are the exact labs I want. Because you can say full thyroid panel, but if that's not an option on there. And I remember when my mom was hospitalized in early 2020 for an autoimmune issue. And I was like, all right, I'd like the full D and whatever. And like literally I'm looking over the nurse's shoulder, cannot even find it to order. Right. So sometimes like they just pick what they can find. So what does it look like to order a full thyroid panel? There's a little bit of a gray area, but here's what I would include at least, right? TSH, free T3, free T4, maybe reverse T3. Let's talk about what that means. And then at least antibodies, TG, thyroglobulin, and thyroid peroxidase antibodies. There are some like other nuances here. And then there's the reference range issues. Let's talk about what these look like or act like in the body for context. The TSH is an alarm clock to say it's time to get up and get ready. So it's a pituitary hormone. It's not a thyroid hormone. Then it sends out messaging, let's go get ready. So T4, this is my analogy for it. T4 is like getting ready for work, getting ready, putting on makeup, putting on clothes, and then you get in your car to drive to work. Let's say stress happens, cortisol hits, and we take the wrong freeway. That is reverse T3. I accidentally went the wrong way instead of going to work. If you check in and clock into work, that is T3. Okay. So, and then when we get into antibodies, that's a little bit different because that's like kind of that's an autoimmune reaction or elevation. It's exacerbating a little bit different way. A couple things that come up a lot is, I don't have a thyroid gland anymore. I'm like, well, that is a bummer. But thyroid is not only produced in the thyroid gland, it is produced in other tissues as well. So what we're trying to do is activate getting you clocked into work, right? Because you're not clocked into work, what else is supposed to happen? So the standard of care is Synthroid or levothyroxine or T4. We already knew that this was getting ready for work, not actually checking in. So what needs to happen is T4 to T3 conversion next. So if you suck at that, right? Like your body does, not that you, like we all have our stuff. If our body sucks at converting T4 to T3, you are not going to feel different at all. Unfortunately, they put you on that and then wait 3 months. I've been really like trying to understand the standard of care well, so that way I can, because there's a lot of education, unfortunately, to do with this, right?
You're doing a fabulous job, by the way.
Okay, good. So I'm trying to make it easy because I think it can be pretty complex. And then I'm going to add some other interesting layers to it. So they're usually going to put you on that for like 3 months and just see how you do, which is like a sad state to live in, because if you already flagged the TSH to be really significant, usually high, to be sluggish, then you already, like, it's literally like walking around under a dark cloud and there's never sunshine. That's what it feels like for you. So you are in the worst case scenario if your labs are out of range. There is a lot that can happen before labs are out of range. So Armour, I want you to correct me. I view this as more natural thyroid hormone, so a glandular. So it's kind of, and I'm a fan of glandulars in other aspects of life. And so it's kind of like, this is actually some of like the earliest integrative medicine that I learned, that putting gland in gives you all the nutrients for that gland to sort of heal and improve itself. So there's a lot of cofactors of nutrients that help all the conversion and activation of this happening. And just giving someone a replacement for T4 does not account for all the other factors that could be optimized to help thyroid move. So some of those cofactors would include vitamin C, zinc, selenium, iodine. This isn't a conversation about go buy every individual supplement.
Yes.
That would not be what that is. This would be looking at food first, always. I would look at food first for those cofactors. I have some issues and concerns with going on long-term zinc supplementation. You're depleting copper, and that is part of the electron transport chain, or how ATP is produced. So that creates, just be careful when you do individual supplement dosing, because you create a opposite. It's like every reaction creates an opposite or antagonistic reaction or whatever, right? So some things, B's and C's, not so much of an issue, vitamin B's and C's, but most of the rest of them, there's kind of a little bit more of a dance. But if you get them in more of a food-based perspective, you can't exactly mess it up. You do it in supplement, you would totally mess it up technically. So
I'm personally not a huge fan of supplementation. I think the quality, the form of the supplementation, all of these are relative. We have to take it into consideration. Life circumstances, less is more, in my opinion, and food first, always. Food first, always, less is more. And then in the event that you have to incorporate supplementation, sometimes it can be necessary. Like, I'll just use myself quickly as an example with what I am personally going through right now with my extreme malnutrition. I have to do everything to just completely bypass the gut. And I'm having to get these nutrients intravenously fed into my body just to keep my baseline stabilized so that I have the ability to keep moving forward on this healing journey that I have been on for the last 18 months. It's been definitely an interesting learning experience. I've learned a lot, and it's definitely shifted my perspective and opinion about where we need to start moving for the future, because the bottom line is we're not dealing with the same variables that we used to. There are a lot of things that have shifted in our environment and planetary wise that are impacting us at a cellular level, and we're not dealing with the same building blocks.
That's what I was going to say. At a cellular level, I would agree with you that people have more complex histories, issues, etc. To oversimplify it, I like to oversimplify very complex topics if possible.
Love that.
It doesn't sound like that when I'm talking, but if I wanted to oversimplify what you said, and I don't know all of what you're dealing with, but if someone says something like that, this is where my brain goes right away, right? Which is on topic of our conversation, which is like, where is adrenal function and how is the health of the cell? Because so often, the very basic concept is that inflammation in some capacity uses up our omega fatty acids, which help create, in addition to other nutrients, the phospholipid layer of the cell. Every single cell has a phospholipid layer. And if you have a shitty phospholipid layer, then you're not going to get nutrients in and out of the cell. Right. And that looks like dry skin and all of these things, right? Or it looks like maybe having loose, like you take a multivitamin, you get a loose stool. That would be like a dead ringer for it. Like, oh, I think this person, and I think inflammation looks different on different people. When the pandemic started, everyone's like, why are athletes dropping dead? Well, they have a lot more inflammation than the average person realizes because they have a lot of intentional inflammation where they're working out, breaking down tissue, trying to rebuild it, and they're using up those omega fatty acids in the phospholipid layer. So when I was doing more comprehensive micronutrient testing, that was such a fun demographic of people because they looked like a total mess, right? But they were like, I'm so healthy, but they were so malnourished, and so just like they could not even get nutrients in the cell.
And mineral depletion is a huge problem in that demographic, which they
and everybody.
Well, everyone, yes, but specifically in high endurance athletes, people who are working out in a high intensity. Many of them are following things like intermittent fasting and other diet protocols that are not necessary.
Not recommend those two things. Not go together.
Keto and IF. Those two seem to be married like hand in hand, and it's like,
they do. That does then it makes sense because they're using it to make it work. Can we talk about minerals?
Yes, absolutely.
And also, if you're listening to this and you're like, but I am that population, I'm interested in it. Maybe if it really is like calling to your heart, you should reach out to Heather or I, because I don't want to do that work, but I'd like to tell you what I've learned about that work. And so if I can help you do better sooner with that population, then we can all like make the world a little bit better place. So that would just be a point. I don't know. I'm just putting us out there for that. But let's talk about minerals, because we see the world in which we view, the lens through which we view it. My lens right now is very mineral heavy. It has been for the last 2 years. And it's kind of catching on like in my online space like wildfire. And so I don't know if it's just the glasses I look through, but if not, let's talk about it here because it's so damn important. Okay, so this does go back to the thyroid conversation. But first, let's talk about why you care. Minerals are the backbone to digestion, to energy, to hormone production, to detoxification, basically everything. So they're the background because they're nutrients. And why do we have them or not have them? Stress dumps minerals. In short, very oversimplified. Cortisol goes up and potassium goes down. It gets dumped out. Aldosterone, that is a hormone that is produced from your adrenal glands, your little stress glands on top of your kidneys. And that helps regulate your blood pressure. And so you'll use up your sodium and trying to regulate that. I'm not saying like the sodium causes necessarily high blood pressure. That's quite a conversation to have, which we could have. But what I will say is that every single cell has a sodium potassium pump in addition to that phospholipid layer. You need that to operate to get those nutrients in and out. And I would say not having potassium. So remember, cortisol goes up. We dump out potassium. We may or may not be replacing our sodium well. But I guarantee people are not replacing their potassium. That's been my experience as evidenced by there are mineral tests that will show, not blood tests, but the tissue, they use hair tissue. I used to think, I first learned about this in like 2009 or 10 and like found those notes recently when I was throwing stuff away. And I thought, oh, this is so sad. I learned about this then and thought it was too hokey. So 2 years ago, I brought this into practice because, and to be honest, I had learned it in a practitioner class like a few years ago. I was like, oh, this is like too supplement heavy. I don't like the way. And so it's just, there's different ways to do everything. Right. And so anyway, I guess the point is potassium helps your glucose check into the cell so you can have energy. It also helps it's one of the cofactors that I missed and forgot to even mention to help thyroid get into the cell. And guess what? We replete it with food, to your point. So we replete it with food, but we're really aggressive. So when I first tested my minerals, my sodium potassium were like non-existent. I just had to like aggressively consume minerals for like the next year to get them out of the toilet. So it's like trying to fill a bathtub. If you don't plug the bathtub. So the problem is people struggle with this because they're not changing their nervous system. So they're not changing the cortisol. So they don't plug the bathtub. And so if you don't plug the bathtub, well, you're just going to you can feel a little bit better, but it's not like if you want long-term results, you must do both things, both plug the bathtub and remineralize like crazy. And when I'm like pretty aggressive. So I was like, everything I was drinking was like targeted electrolyte for like sodium, potassium. So that was a little bit of the.
Well, I'm glad that you bring this up because I think that people don't realize that a lot of their natural everyday habits are having really negative consequences, specifically on mineral concentration. So for instance, many people are skipping breakfast, going straight to the coffee, the energy drinks, the caffeinated beverages. And these are having really negative consequences on that entire nervous system regulation, but most specifically that aldosterone hormone that you mentioned. These act as diuretics, so it causes our body to flush these fluids. And as we're flushing the fluids, we're also flushing out the minerals that are being pulled out of our bones as an attempt to try and buffer the pH of the blood system to keep it in that neutralized state. So we have a lot of things working against us. And then if people are drinking water, typically it's going to be a filtered or purified water that is devoided of all of those natural minerals to begin with. So we're kind of, trying to push the boat upstream without a paddle.
Yeah, it is really tricky. And to speak to water, what are always the lowest hanging fruits that we could address? Our air and our water. So, and if you can please take a bath with minerals, like that would be great too.
So when I initially, after getting COVID in 2021, I went into acute kidney failure. My GFR dropped into stage 3 kidney failure from having an optimal GFR. It was like 105 all the way down into the 50s within a matter of 3 weeks. And
what were your signs and how did you know?
Well, so I got diagnosed with kidney disease in 94, which is what led me down this whole path. I got diagnosed with IgA nephropathy, couldn't get health insurance, was told I had 5 years to live. So that was the motivating factor for my going down the rabbit hole of holistic practices to figure out what options I had, which then eventually led me to becoming a dietitian. So I am very aware, but to speak to that, ultimately, the biggest symptom that I was experiencing was waking up, having a dry weight, let's say 132 pounds. And then by the end of the day, my weight being somewhere around 148, 150. So I was averaging around 20 pounds on a daily basis from wake to sleep of fluid retention. And so I knew immediately something was definitely not right. And then obviously did it
happen kind of after you had, like when did it really present again?
So what happened? So what happened for me is on September 1st, I woke up with the first symptoms of having COVID. I had a fever, sore throat, massive fatigue. I had a fever of 104 for 11 days straight. So in that 11 days, I was pretty much in a coma in my bed and trying to do everything I could to naturally bring down my body temperature because I couldn't take any of the over counter type of stuff because I didn't want to degrade my kidney function even further. So with that 104 fever, it was about a week after that cleared up that the fluid retention started. So that's when like things just slowly started going downhill very, very quickly. Which ultimately in the beginning with having such reduced kidney function in such a short time, I knew I had to be aggressive with addressing the kidney issues. And so one of the first protocols that I utilized was taking detoxification baths to help support getting the minerals infused back into my system via skin. And then pulling the toxins out at the same time. So I did 1 cup of dead sea salt, which I had to get dead sea salt online. It was really expensive, but totally worth it. And then 1 cup of baking soda, mixing both of those together and then soaking in the bathtub for 30 minutes for 30 days straight. After that 30 days of doing this 30 minutes, I reevaluated 24-hour urinalysis along with the kidney lab metrics and was able to pull myself up out of that stage 3 into a more normal GFR. I think I got it up into like the low 80s from the low 50s.
Nice.
And now I just got my labs back this morning and I'm at 104. So as far as
acute kidney
injury. So it was a massive acute kidney. I will always have protein and blood in my urine just from the initial damage of IgA nephropathy. That will always be there, but to have my GFR in a better function.
What triggered the initial IgA nephropathy? I don't remember.
So for me, I had gotten a respiratory infection and about 2 weeks after that had cleared up, then I started urinating just straight blood, like literally just straight blood. Now, what led to the respiratory infection that allowed this genetic mutation to actually turn on were complete environmental circumstances. At that time, I was doing a lot of crystal meth. So methamphetamines, I was not drinking any fluids. If I did drink fluids, it was just Mountain Dew or coffee. If I ate, it was Skittles or Sprees. I would go on binges for days, weeks at a time where I wouldn't sleep. My body was just in an absolutely overly stressed, malnourished state. Combination of all of this weakened the immune system, allowed a viral respiratory infection to present that then triggered the IgA to actually turn on and become prevalent in the system. So, I think it's important that we speak to that because so often we're led to believe that our circumstances are genetic, that we're victims of those genetics, that we can't do anything about it. Had I bought into that at that time when I got the diagnosis, I would have been dead within those 5 years like they predicted. However, I couldn't buy that. I said, I don't know. Something just tells me that I can change this. And I was aggressive and very successful. And up until getting COVID in 21, had optimal kidney function. So it's sense. Important that
always opportunity. Always opportunity.
Always.
Right? We're moved to change. And hindsight's always 20/20, but whatever, right? Because we all think kind of bulletproof at certain phases of our life. We all do.
Right.
I take great, I like to psychoanalyze my clients, like not in a, but I like to like think about human behavior. Like, and I even do it out of judgment. I'm just like, we're interested in human beings. Like, this is our human behavior. So we are moved to change through desperation or inspiration, but it's usually desperation.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
At least you had at least you were able to knew what you needed to do.
Well,
so
it was really allowing myself the opportunity to listen to the intuitive voice, that all knowing within me that was guiding me towards what I needed. You know, had I just bought into the white coat and the diagnosis, I can guarantee you that it would have looked exactly like they had said it would have, and that would have been dialysis or transplant within those 5 years.
Used to.
Yeah.
I was a dialysis dietitian for a long time. People were in rough shape.
Yes.
And you brought up a good point that I want to underline, which was that you were using dead sea salts, right? Yes. And so those had more trace minerals than just most straight Epsom salt, right? Which is what is it, magnesium sulfate instead of magnesium chloride. Either way, there's other trace minerals in the dead sea salt. So that's one thought. And I know your other question was about filtered water and like the overall, like the benefits, whatever, between filtered water, not filtered water. And so what can you adjust first? You're right. So things are filtered. I have a well, so I just feel like I'm kind of like in this kind of living in a state of like, well, I don't have a filter because I have a well, which has a lot of minerals in it. However, so there's that's kind of a pretty big open conversation. Yeah. What are like some simple things if your water is very filtered, not saying it shouldn't be filtered from some things, what can you do? You can add back trace minerals, right? So like just focusing on the most bottom line was the easiest thing you can do potentially. Right. Is a good place to start. Yeah. You brought up all of I know you grabbed a book. So
yeah, I did. Well, I just wanted, are you familiar with this guy's work?
I have heard of this, but I don't know about it.
His protocols were developed after the Hiroshima bomb and radiation poisoning. And so when everything presented for me initially, I was very much convinced that there was a radiation component that was playing in conjunction to the virus that I had experienced. And so we can't not address 5G and the impact that 5G is having on us at a cellular level, and how this is disrupting our membranes from being able to actually absorb those nutrients efficiently. So I can't remember. I think this book came out in like the 1980s, but it was his bad.
Some good stuff from back then.
I know. And so ultimately it was his protocol of the detoxification bath that I had followed to help rehab the kidneys, and it worked very efficiently. Now, was it convenient to have to set aside 30 minutes every single day? Because I'm human, right? My husband and I, we had weekend trips planned and things of that nature. So it did definitely, have some of the barriers, that went with it, with having to be consistent and really be mindful about incorporating this and making it happen despite whatever the circumstances were at that time. I had to figure out how to make it happen. Right. But it was totally worth it. Yeah. Exactly. But totally worth it. So back
when in doubt, detoxify nourished wise, not this undernourished detoxification bullshit, but nourished.
Exactly. So then I ended up taking it a step further, and for myself, I decided to invest in the Kangen water filtration system, which was developed a little over 30 years ago from a Japanese cardiovascular surgeon. And basically what it does is it takes the water molecules and it breaks them down into the smallest ions possible so that it can actually cross that phospholipid membrane, get the water into the cells along with having the minerals available, and then obviously filtering out all of the harmful toxins that are in our water. I live in Irvine, California, which when I pulled up the EWG.org's website, typed in my zip code, and went through the levels of toxins. When I saw the level of arsenic in the water, I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, it's absolutely absurd. The halogens are so heavy. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we know that these have a very specific impact on our thyroid's ability to function. If we have halogen poisoning, the thyroid is definitely not going to be able to do what it needs to do.
That is one area that when people ask me about supplementation, I'm like, I don't know where, I mean, the options to get iodine food-based are just not what people typically do. Right. And I feel like if you are being exposed to chlorine and fluorine on a regular basis, there's no way that your thyroid could work properly.
It can't.
It's going to be pushed. The iodine is going to be pushed off. So this is like, the thyroid is not a small topic. It's an amazing topic. And I think there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of options to optimize. And we have been bad mouthing iodine, which is wrong. Right. I mean, that we could go off on tangents about that. I won't.
So, so here's the thing. Most of the public, their normal source of iodine exposure is through table salt. It's through, the Morton's table salt. And unfortunately, in that Morton's table salt, we also have a component called potassium ferrocyanide, which is extremely toxic and very, very, very damaging to our kidneys, which is why we see DaVita dialysis centers popping up on the corner of every single intersection in every single city, neighborhood, and town. So we have to get away from this iodized salt that contains this potassium ferrocyanide, and we need to find ways to incorporate that iodine more naturally. But we have limited resources to do so. It's very, very challenging. So I know that Celtic sea salt typically is a better source of iodine, but trying to find a Celtic sea source that you can purchase that actually contains the iodine is really hard. It's really
I mean, I use that and other mineral salt, but I still use iodine supplementally. This is just my preference occasionally because it did wonders for my brain.
What form of iodine do you supplement with?
Partial iodide and partial iodine because different tissue.
Is it a liquid or is it a capsule or a liquid form?
I use a variety. Okay. So the kind of gold standard is Lugol's, right? But that one actually I think is a little bit hard to find. So I just experiment with a few different brands and I use some tablets, some capsules. I've used liquid. I've just used all of them. For me, it was a dose dependent. So we're not all the same, obviously. I had a lot of calcium stuck in my tissue for different reasons, probably also because it was in my water and all just other crap. Because if you take certain other supplements, you can create calcium stuck in tissue. Looking at you, vitamin D, a little bit. So, so I had calcium standing in the way as evidenced by mineral stuff. So I actually, there's some levels. Basically, I have a higher tolerance to iodine than some other people do. Right. So, before I did my iodine loading test, when you do an iodine loading test, which is just like, I don't even have people do that as much because everyone was deficient, but, and it's just a noble obstacle and then people can't see the benefits from it. So I always think a lot of with iodine for me, and if you read any of Brownstein's books, they're really lovely. I think it's like very like easy to read stuff. It's a little bit of experimentation. Essentially. And so, before I did the iodine loading test, you take 50 milligram tab of iodine. And for 3 days, I was like, I am a rock star of focus. Like I didn't even know. So what's funny is I just thought I had ADHD forever and just undiagnosed ADHD. And when I look at the symptoms for ADHD and sluggish thyroid, I'm like, this is the exact same thing. Like, understand. And I know this other gal and she's got Hashimoto's and she's like symptoms of Hashimoto's, symptoms of mold, the exact same. Right. So anyway, there's just things that turn on that response or whatever. But this is my personal feelings. Like, is ADHD actually just a sluggish thyroid? Just my questions, that I ask myself and sometimes talk to people about.
Right. So. Yeah. There are a lot of very disappointed listeners right now because they are very much attached to that ADHD diagnosis.
Do you think we all need to have ADHD?
Fuck no. Oh my God.
No. I am enjoying the hell out of my coffee powder with lion's mane in it. Holy moly. I got to tell you a couple of fun like anecdotes. This weekend, I did a 3-day, all-day immersion on theta breathwork and theta healing. So that was lovely. And my kids were not home, and I got to Sunday and I was like, wow, I am just so like oozing with love, which is like not normal for me, right? Like I was like fully immersed in that. Where am I going with this? Oh, I know where I'm at. So I did that. And then I have been drinking the hell out of lion's mane, and I've just been feeling like so on it. And then there was one other detail here. But the point is I started my menstrual cycle today, and usually a couple days before my menstrual cycle, I have a day of apathy where I'm like, life is silly.
Yeah.
Like my job, like I have a great job. It's amazing. I love what I do. And one day a month, I'm like,
yeah,
I don't enjoy it. And I did not have that this month. So all of that theta healing and breathwork and lion's mane, I was like, I'm like a focused machine.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm this month. And I'm like, maybe I should try that every month.
I love it. So let me ask you this. When you went into this immersion experience, did your nervous system sit with it immediately, or did it take some time to integrate for your body to be able to sit there and actually allow yourself to go through the process?
Oh, this is such a good question, because this is basically about how you format a retreat in general. The first day, you're always like, oh, I got other stuff I got to do. That's always what happens on day one of retreat stuff is like, it takes me a minute to drop in, settle in, etc., and like block out the noises. So I had to think about this for a moment because it was a handful of days ago. So I was thinking about Friday, and I did have distractions that day that I was like, I got to get these out of my brain and all of these things. So yeah, challenging issues to drop in, struggle to like stop and take that time. So I took care of all that stuff Friday night after we were done. And then the next day I was like, and part of that was, and this is such, so often when you go into presentations or whatever, they're like, put your phone down. It's a distraction. And it is, our neural programming is like, let me check that. Let me look at that. And I have most notifications turned off for this reason, because I don't need this hustle bullshit culture. Like I literally have stickers on the back of my phone that say like relentlessly eliminate worry. Like such manufactured baloney so often, So the simple answer is yes, of course. And then also what I was very hyper aware of is I don't think I've ever been in my home without my family. They had left for the weekend and I was home instead of, I actually had planned to go into the office and whatever. And I was like, well, this is an unusual thing. And it was lovely. It went really quickly. But when they came home, I was like, wow, chaos. Yeah. Because you're just like, you settle into that. And I was like, I said to my husband last night, I'm like, can you ever just sit still and quiet? He's like, I sit with my thoughts all day long, because he wanted to turn the TV on last night. And I was like, I just need some quiet, please. So anyway, short answer, yes, but that's also good to acknowledge. Like we all have this kind of struggle if we don't separate. And I think the best way for us to reset is to take some intentional time, once a year ish, I might end up in a place without any phone service for a few days. And oh man, it's it takes a little bit of time to reset those neural pathways, but if you can do it, like you just feel a lot better and a lot different. So.
I think it's important to bring that up to address for the audience, because I know that a lot of individuals, myself included, trying to intentionally set that downtime to really focus on the parasympathetic nervous system function can be so challenging initially, because it goes against our subconscious safe and alive. We're so used to being in this hustle culture, this whole materialistic world of go, 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 that our baseline state of survival is living in that constant state of cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline. So when we aren't getting that fix, it can be very challenging for the nervous system and for the individual who is trying to do that transitional moment. And more often than less, we give up rather than trying to stick with it. So I think it's important to address that it takes time. So for those that are listening, I guess the important takeaway is you have to give yourself more time than what you would like to schedule for winding down.
I'm excited for when you have a retreat center someday and we can all just go there and reset our nervous systems and come home and like, because I feel like you can get such good, as you said, integration if you are able to drop in and spend that dedicated amount of time. And then you can go out and you have two choices. You can go back to exactly how you were, or you can build on the foundation that you've created over that time. I have a lot of feelings about that as well.
Yeah. Well, we're in a paradigm shift in terms of humanity and cultural practices. And it's really interesting to see it split in two different pathways. We have a part of the population who is just very much attached to the go, 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 the materialistic world, this whole AI agenda and timeline. And then we have another part of society that is going, you know what? This isn't working. We have enough proof and evidence to show that this is not working to sustain the human body, our natural anatomy and physiology. And so we've got to get back to basics. We've got to really get back to basics and try to hone in on creating more of the sacred relationships with Mother Earth and the natural rhythms that we were meant to be in tune with. And that's something I think that whole other part of society has completely dismissed, which is perpetuating all of the problems, which is why they're going to need, implants and things injected in them in order to bypass and override the natural consequences of this kind of lifestyle.
Like Darwinian shit.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's been an interesting, polarizing, intriguing few years. And I always feel like I won't ever run out of things to do because there's a lot of needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, what are some of the things, what are some of your personal practices? I guess where I'm going with this question is this. To be a healer of self, it's almost a fucking full-time job these days, right? We have to do all of the things. There's so many boxes to check. This is where the functional integrative model, in my opinion, can be a bit problematic because it's just impossible for people to follow the protocols and stay consistent with the protocols. Therefore, they never get the full results. And as a result of that, it leaves a lot of frustration, a lot of checking out, and a lot of desperation for quick fixes. And people will lean towards the intermittent fasting and the keto diet and stuff of this nature as an attempt to try and offset that. So as an individual who's on their own continued healing journey, what are some of your non-negotiables? What are the things that you absolutely, these are I have to check these boxes. If I don't get anything accomplished, I at least have to get this. So what does that look like for you specifically?
Well, I don't have boxes I have to check.
That's fabulous.
But I'm going to boil this down to a couple of, I think this piece of wisdom is something that I had to teach myself, and it will be part of my legacy moving forward. You are, and I know this is just like on your page, you are only as healthy as your nervous system. You will never be more healthy than your nervous system. That takes radical self-awareness and radical self-responsibility. And anytime you want to remove those two things, you will struggle and you will spin and spin and spin. You will look for someone else to give you the answers. I think there's a lot of answers within you. I think that once your nervous system is dysregulated, then you have a spiral of physiological dysregulation. And that's where my business has been. And I see the other piece of it must be half or more of nervous system. So for me, I had to acknowledge and become ultra aware and more responsible for my nervous system. What that looks like is checking in with myself to see how fast am I talking and is my heart rate elevated, right? How much am I filling on my schedule? Because it takes a lot to break up with, I used to live with a pretty overfull schedule. And then I would just be totally crashed. I didn't even realize it, at the end I was like, oh, I'm fine. I can do this. And no, you actually can't because you you pour a lot out. So I have to be radically aware of these things. I would say that's a non-negotiable, but it's not like a checked box every day. It's kind of an ongoing thing, right? And then I like to keep it really basic. There's really only like a couple of things I kind of use for assessment tools for me, which is, and this came up years ago. Someone said, how will you know you're successful? And I'm not successful at this every day. My answer is I go to bed early and get up early, right? Like, cause I feel better when I do these things, cause everything else can like fall into line, right? I don't have like revenge bedtime, or if I do have revenge, like it doesn't actually, never works out well. You know what I mean? Like I've experienced all of it. So like, I already know, like, let's just get on with life. Like, let's just do what we need to do. So going to bed and getting up early is how I know I'm successful. Am I successful every day? Damn straight I am not, right? The other thing is I check in with my hydration and my mineralization because it's such a backbone of like, of I care about feeling good and I pay attention if I'm not feeling good. So for me, it's really that simple. It doesn't have to look like some like, yeah, I might like to explore different modalities, but it's all out of curiosity and how do I feel in that, right? And how do I understand how this fits into the bigger framework of what I'm going for myself? I mean, I understand different health frameworks, right? So I know where things can fit and how things can be toxic. And let me just share one toxic thing, I guess, because that felt good. I should just end there. But what we tend to focus too much on is removal. The steps of the integrated process are remove, repair, replace, repair, repopulate. Maybe rebalance, depends on whose format you look at. But remove, we do need to remove toxic burden, et cetera. But sometimes we focus on remove more than like replacing and nourishment, et cetera. And so to go back, kind of circling back to our first, is there are things you have to remove, you know, but some of them, if they're contributing to like, if they're taking away from you or taking away from your cup, that's the issue. I want to share just one more practice that can help cut through the noise for you specifically. In leaning into that intuitive, like what's right for me type thing, I sit down and do this exercise every once in a while, maybe a few times a year. I sit down and I draw just a line down the piece of paper and I write down like what is filling my cup right now and what is really draining my cup. And if you get that on paper and you can see it and you acknowledge it and it's not just freaking hamster wheel in your brain, because when you put it out, you know how like when you talk to a friend and you somehow come up with the answer because you talked through it? It's just like that. So you write those things down. Then I look at the stuff that I hate or that's emptying my cup and I say, let me figure out how I could get rid of those things. I don't want to do those things anymore. So that is constant, right? Like that is our life. Like we are constantly being pulled in different directions and I need to decide what I'm going to put in my cup filling spot and my cup and get rid of the cup emptying stuff. I would just say you have to decide what that looks like.
Yeah. I think those are fabulous tips. I love everything that you said, awareness, the sleep wake cycle, hydration and mineralization. I think that these are all very core components of the pillars that make up, you know, our overall health and well-being. And if we overlook those things, no matter how on point our diet is, no matter how on point our exercise regimen is, we're never going to be able to optimize those things and in the way that we absolutely desire. So for me, in my current place of where I'm at, the thing for me is really about honoring whatever it is my body is calling me towards. So being more aware of that intuitive knowing and being able to trust in whatever that pathway is that I'm being called towards. So I'm going to give the listeners a quick example. So about 2 months ago now, I started having massive cravings for orange juice, like the most ridiculous cravings for orange juice, which is something that is really odd for me. I've never really been an orange juice drinker. And so I'd go to the grocery store and I'd check out all of the options, you know, and sit there and ponder, what's the best one, you know, for what I'm desiring. Ultimately, my body just kept saying, get the fresh, get the oranges, just buy the oranges. So I started buying oranges, bringing them home, juicing them myself. I'm going through 30 pounds of oranges, hand squeezing a week. Okay. Here's the thing. I have scurvy. So my body knew that I had scurvy and it was calling me towards the solution to fix this deficiency. And had I been a stubborn dietitian who was like, I can't do orange juice. Orange juice. I probably would not be feeling half as good as I am right now. But it's very comical because here I am with my 30 pounds of oranges at the farmer's market every week, lugging them back to my car. And people are looking at me and they're like, God, are you feeding a football team? And I'm like, nope, this is just my personal need for the week. So
there is, that's so interesting. And so cool.
Yes.
I learned so much about self-regulation from you, actually, by the way.
Yeah.
So
that's exciting.
I think you can have like that was actually like a huge like aha moment for me. It was just, that was not what you were saying. You were talking about intuitive, but there was something that sparked that for me before. But anyway, so cool.
Yeah. So
I love a really tangible example of listening to your
it's
body.
Funny because I was in group education last week and I was addressing the group and using myself as, the example, because I'm just I will forever be a guinea pig of experimentation, right? For the cause of the greater good. And so here I am, I'm in this group and I'm mentioning that I've got scurvy, and there happens to be a doctor who's in the group and he's like, scurvy? What? You don't have scurvy. There's no way you could have scurvy. I've never even seen a case of scurvy in my lifetime practicing as a doctor. And I just looked at him and I smiled and I said, well, you might want to put it on your radar because I have a feeling that we're going to start seeing a lot more of these diagnoses around scurvy. And the reason or the root cause of this is because vitamin C plays such a huge role with not only immune system function, but also nervous system regulation, that we don't have the resources available. We just don't have the appropriate bank filled.
How did you know that you had it?
Well, I mean, if you want to get graphic, once I had massive, just every time I would even swallow, blood would be coming out of my gums, like literally just draining from my gums, bruising like there was no tomorrow, like just barely brushing up against a piece of clothing. And I would have just black and blue bruising, massive bleeding, poor wound healing, all of the, the things that typically are associated. So I went and had the testing done, and sure enough, it was just not even existent. I was like, wow. And at that time I was supplementing with over 10,000 IUs of ascorbic acid.
No, it wasn't getting into the tissue.
Yeah, so not getting into the tissue. And then ultimately, with what I have discovered, over the last 18 months of where the root cause of all of the issues that I'm having, which is this hypothalamic thermic loop that I have been in. So as a result of getting this 104 fever for 11 days straight, basically what it did was fry the hypothalamus. Right. And so the entire network, neurotransmitter regulation, as well as hormonal regulation, cannot be efficient because things are going to the wrong places. There's just, mis-signaling that has occurred. And as a result of that, it's basically shut down my gut and my body's ability to actually break the nutrients down and absorb them into the bloodstream. So it contributed to massive SIBO infection, massive inflammation of the entire digestive tract. Like, it's just been an absolute nightmare.
How did you find out that it was how did you figure out what it was? Did you find other cases of similar things?
No. So I have been on a desperate search of knowledge over the last 18 months, really just trying to get to the root and, basically trying all of the obvious approaches first, ruling all of that stuff out. And I had watched a documentary on Gaia that introduced me to this phenomenal doctor, Dr. Drobot out of Arizona, who is the founder of Biomed. And he connected me to this amazing man he is in Minnesota. He's in Minnesota. His name is Guy Audishaw, and ultimately he was the one who was able to trace back over the timeline of events to be able to get to the identifying what actually why all of these things have occurred for me. Basically, I mean, liver failure, kidney failure, like all the systems shutting down. And so ultimately, what?
Has to have started in the
brain,
brain,
so it all started in that hypothalamus with that prolonged fever that basically just fried the network. And so now we are integrating a very specific protocol utilizing infrared light, red light, blue light, and then vibrational frequencies and audio and visual, different vibrational frequencies. And it's crazy because I have started the last leg of this new protocol by adding in the AVE and the CES devices. And I have been getting my blood work done like literally every couple of weeks to see where I'm at. And just in 1 week of implementing this new component to what I was already doing, almost all of my immune system factors decreased by half. Like the amount of healing that I have experienced in just the last week from adding these new devices in have been profound, like absolutely profound.
I kind of want I'm going to talk to you about more of this offline, just because I love to learn and I want to learn. I love exogenous therapies.
Yeah. This is the wave of the future. This is the wave of the future. As we mentioned earlier in this podcast, we're not dealing with the same variables that we had been. No. And there's a multitude of things that are occurring. Right now, we have light frequencies that are being emitted from the sun that are the highest that we have ever experienced. And the purpose of this is to get in at a cellular level to alter the DNA so that we have the ability to hold a higher vibrational frequency in the equivalent of density so that we can raise up in that vibrational frequency to drop out a lot of the negative things that humanity has experienced for millennia. And it's exciting. However, from a physiological perspective, we have never experienced this before. So with these light frequencies that are coming in and having an impact on the mitochondria and the DNA sequencing within our cells, it's also requiring more minerals and more fluids in order to make these alterations effective. Otherwise, it's just degrading immune system like there's no tomorrow. And then if we want to take into consideration the whole, spiked protein circumstance and what is happening at a cellular level from these spiked proteins, and then we have to integrate 5G as well, we're getting hit on so many levels that we can't keep up with the demand based on the standard American diet and lifestyle choices that most people abide by. Even for us very holistic minded individuals, we're struggling. So, to see ourselves in such a consistent struggle, despite the fact that we have really on point lifestyle practices, speaks volumes to the collective in terms of we're going to see a lot of immune system deaths over the next 10 years. People are just going to be dropping like flies if they don't start rethinking their approach to their everyday life and really focusing on awareness and nervous system regulation. We don't stand a chance. So a
conversation to be continued. Yes, a full one too.
Yes. So, you and I, we could chat all day. We're very, very much on the same page and have a lot of beliefs and practices that we, encourage others to abide by. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. Tell the listeners how they can connect with you.
Well, since you're listening to Heather's podcast, my podcast is called The Less Stressed Life. And I would say anything that fits into the triad of health, emotional regulation, or structural regulation of the body is fair game. So it's my favorite place. On Instagram, I'm anti-inflammatory nutritionist, and I do like a community call I like to talk to people in real life. So jump onto those, but those are great ways to get in touch with me.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm sure that the listeners, their brains are just going like, woo, this is a lot and it's going to take a little time to integrate this information. But if you're looking to, get more information around the potential consequences with suboptimal thyroid functioning, definitely reach out to Christina so that she can kind of, help support you and guide you on your path towards healing and getting to feel better, because ultimately this is one of the most overlooked circumstances in the Western paradigm when it comes to our 1 year, one time wellness checkup and all of our symptoms being completely dismissed. So thank you, Christa, so much for being with us. I truly appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Think Yourself Healthy podcast. Do me a favor, and if you loved this episode, please go leave a review. Reviews help make sure that this content reaches more people so that we can continue to heal as a collective. Remember to take a screenshot that you're listening and tag us on Instagram at Heather Barbieri RDN for a 15% discount on the Retrain Your Brain program. See you next time.